Welcome again, everyone. Very excited to have you on board with us, and also very excited to have Adam Swidler present a webinar on the security and reliability of Google Apps. And I'll hand it over to Adam.
Thanks very much, Anya, and welcome everyone. Glad you could join us today. So Google Apps gets a lot of attention for the messaging and collaboration benefits, as well as the cost savings benefits that come with it when you deploy it throughout your enterprise or your organization. But one of the things that is also a significant benefit is in the area of security and reliability, and we wanted to take some time today to really focus in on a number of areas there and give you some really good insight into kind of how we protect the data that's in Google Apps, as well as how we build and run our systems that help support those protections. So what we're going to talk about for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to start a little bit with what are some of the challenges that you face in your environment today, right? Because that's one of the measurements, one of the yardsticks that we want to use to compare the security and reliability benefits in Google Apps with what you've got today. Then you'll actually get a look inside our data centers to some degree at sort of how we build the systems, how we run them, how we design the systems for reliability, et cetera. We'll switch a little bit and talk about some of the control mechanisms that you have as an administrator of Google Apps within your domain, and a bit about how we handle authentication for the users to the service. We'll talk a little bit about some of the policies that you can enforce, particularly from a security standpoint, and then we'll get into a topic area around trust, which is a grouping of things that we do to try to earn the trust of the marketplace and of our customers that will help you, again, in terms of visibility and understanding to the things that we do with the data and how you can manage and manipulate the data inside Google Apps. Again, as Anya mentioned, if questions come up as we're going through the presentation, feel free to submit them through the Q&A panel, and we'll see if we can take a few along the way, and then there'll be some time at the end as well. So the first thing that we're going to look at in terms of your current environment is why security is so tough. And one of those big areas is around patching your systems, right? So many of us have kind of developed an expertise or a core competency around rapidly deploying patches to the systems in our IT infrastructure. And we've gotten that way really because there hasn't been many other choices. It's a situation where the more systems you have, the more complex, challenging, expensive, and time-consuming the problem can get. So, of course, many of you out there have multiple operating systems, multiple applications, potentially different versions of those things. And then each one of them has their own patch lifecycle, and in particular, security patch lifecycle. There's a significant industry literally built around just managing patches and the patch process. And a survey that was completed, it's getting a little bit old now, but it was shown that on average, organizations can take between 25 and 56 days to deploy an operating system patch. Now, when I talk to companies and organizations, typically they're telling me they're doing much better than that they're deploying especially security-related patches in a much shorter time frame than that. And I sort of say, that's good, that's important. You want to be able to patch those vulnerabilities. But what has it taken for you to get to that stage in terms of an investment in time, investment in IT resources, et cetera? And of course, while people in your organization are working on those patches, whether they're downloading them, testing them, then deploying them, in some cases having to back them out if they're not working properly, that's all time spent on that process, which could be better spent on other IT-related activities. So this has really become, I think, a significant issue. I'm sure many of you on the line deal with it on a daily basis. It's probably become something that you're so familiar with it that it doesn't feel like a front and center pain like it used to. But I think there's a great opportunity in looking at Google Apps to really change the game around patching and get out of the business of patching at least a big chunk of the servers within your infrastructure by essentially shifting that burden to us. And I'll talk a little bit about how we handle that in a few slides. I think another big challenge for the traditional IT environment is data portability, right? Users want to be able to access their data anywhere from any device at any time. And so this has caused them to do things like put data on devices so that they can take it with them and work on it when they're mobile and on the road. And so here are some statistics. there's a huge amount of data that resides on unprotected PC desktops and laptops. There's a lot of that is on laptop devices. And the statistic from the FBI in the middle there, 1 out of 10 laptop computers are stolen within the first year of purchase. And then you've got much smaller devices like thumb drives, which are obviously very, very prone to being lost or being stolen. Those devices are commonly storing data that you might not want to have lose control of. So, it's not malicious typically that users are doing this. They want to be able to access their information and be productive in various locations using various devices. But it leads to this sort of data portability and control problem that comes up. And again, when you look at Google Apps, there's some real benefits here in terms of being able to access that data for the user wherever they are on whatever device that they want to use, because they're accessing it in our data centers using Google Apps with our servers providing access to that document or to the email. So there's some real benefits there in terms of allowing users to be effective when they're on the road, when they're mobile, get access to their data without having to require that they bring their data with them and store it on a device. So we're going through a little bit of an evolution when it comes to security in cloud computing applications, which of course is what Google Apps is. And you can use an analogy to what happened in kind of the banking industry. There was a time when folks didn't trust the banks and they ended up storing their money at home. And then over time, as the banks were able to demonstrate a sort of superior capability to protect the data, vaults, closed-circuit TV cameras, things like that, they were able to essentially earn the trust of the public. And now, of course, everybody stores their data, stores their money, I should say, in the banks and not at home. And with cloud computing, and in particular with Google Apps, we're going through a similar evolution as we share more information, as we open up the transparency into what we do. That's helping customers understand how we protect the data and allowing them to move their email and their collaboration documents into the cloud and use Google Apps. So we take a very comprehensive approach to the security controls for Google Apps. And these are outlined in pretty good detail in a white paper that we have that's available off of our security website, which the link is at the bottom of this. It's google.com/apps/trust. But we've taken sort of a confidentiality, integrity, and availability type of approach, a CIA type of approach, and broken out all of these things within that white paper. I'm going to highlight a few of them as we go through things, but if you want to get a more in-depth look at what we do, I encourage you to go to google.com/apps/trust and look for the security white paper that's there. So from an architecture standpoint, we have a cloud architecture that we've built over the course of our lifetime. This is the same cloud architecture that underlies all of our services, whether it's Google.com, whether it's Checkout, our e-commerce platform, whether it's Google Apps or Consumer Gmail. All of those are supported by this cloud architecture that's pure and proven. So when we say pure and proven, we mean two things. From a pure standpoint, it's really 100% web environment. All you need is a browser, and one that supports HTML5 will give your end users the best user experience in using our applications. But you don't have a bunch of software that needs to be installed on the client, and that also gives you the great portability across different devices and mobile devices, smartphones, tablets, etc. We have dozens of data centers that give us this great redundancy in terms of data access and reliability. Now, for the most part, the locations are not publicized. We do have some information that's available on our website on where these things are. And many of you may be in situations where you have data centers that you run and manage. And you'll see a lot of the same types of things in our data center. So, of course, we have 24/7 guard coverage. We have electronic key access and logs of who's going in and out, closed-circuit TVs, alarms, etc. We've got dual and redundant everything. So power supplies, internet connections, backup batteries, and diesel generators all in place at the data center. So if there's any sort of isolated problem at any of the data centers, such as loss of power from the utility, loss of internet connection, there are redundancies in place at each one of the data centers. But then furthermore, the way we build our applications provides data replication, and that allows us, if there's a more significant issue with one of our data centers, to actually shift access for users to another data center seamlessly so that they can still get access to their email and their documents, even if one of our data centers is kind of entirely offline. So again, these are the types of things that you folks that manage and run your own data centers probably have similar types of things in place. We just do it on a much larger scale than most organizations, and we get some great efficiencies and economies of scale because of that. So as we sort of dive inside that building a little bit, if you will, and take a look at how we manage things inside the data centers, let's talk first about the actual servers that are in place there. We actually build all of our own servers. We design them anyway, and then we contract to have them built. They're made out of component hardware, again, to our own design specifications, but that allows us to do something that is significant from a security standpoint. We don't put any hardware that's unnecessary on these servers that go into the data centers. And that helps reduce the surface area for threats, if you will. It helps reduce the potential vulnerabilities that might be exploited, because this is a custom-built piece of hardware that is designed to support the cloud applications that we deliver, including Google Apps. Similarly, on the software side, we have a hardened custom version of the Linux operating system running on these custom hardware. And that also really helps to combine to create a reduced vulnerability set because there's no unnecessary drivers or unnecessary code built into the kernel when we assemble it. So there's a real significant security benefit, I think, that's very different from a lot of traditional IT environments where you're dealing with, some of the more commercially available operating systems, and again, going through this sort of never-ending treadmill of vulnerability discovery and patches and things like that. The other real significant benefit from the homogeneous system standpoint is our ability to very rapidly update all of these systems. They're all virtually identical across our entire infrastructure, and our ability to very rapidly update them when we have to. So again, we talked about the reduced set of vulnerabilities. There are certainly some times when we identify a vulnerability and a patch that we want to roll out. We're able to do that very, very rapidly, and of course that's completely seamless and hidden from our end users and our customers. There's no need for them to deal with any of that patching or to spend any of those cycles on patch management. From a data distribution standpoint, data storage standpoint, we have what's called a multi-tenant model. So we have a storage mechanism that's known as the Google File System, GFS. There's been some academic papers published about that. And what it does is allow us to share data across multiple different servers, multiple different hard drives within a data center, and so that there's no one server that has a full set of readable data for a corporation or for a user. So we store this data spread out across many different drives. You can almost think of it as taking your data and shredding it and spreading those pieces all across many different drives, and then being able to reassemble it whenever you need that data. But should anyone get their hands on a drive, they would only have tiny little fragments of data from any one organization. Now, we also do something that's called obfuscation of the data on disk. And what that means is that it's not stored in a clear text mechanism. So again, if someone were to get their hands on a drive, they wouldn't be able to read the data that's on there, and it would only be fragments of data from various users within our usage base. Now, when it comes to asset management and sort of the life of a hard drive, we have a very robust process for labeling and then tracking hard drives when they come into our data centers. And when a hard drive starts to exhibit signs that it's not performing up to standard, we send a technician out to the data center. They scan the drive. They remove it from the rack. They bring it to a further secured facility, so a caged facility inside the data center, where they then analyze the drive. In order to ensure that there's no trace of data on the drive, we go through a write once, read twice process. So we overwrite all the data that was on that drive. And of course, because we have data replication, your data is still safe and available. It's just that drive that we're looking at that we overwrite. And then we see if the drive is able to perform at the level that we need it to put it back into circulation. If it's not, we actually destroy that drive in that caged facility before it leaves the data center. And so that further ensures that no one is able to potentially do any dumpster diving or anything like that to obtain customer or user data off of drives that we use in the data centers. And there are multiple checkpoints along the way that validate this asset management process. So that gives you a little bit of a look kind of inside the data centers in terms of what we're doing kind of behind the scenes. From an operations standpoint, we have a security team that's 24/7. We actually have a global set of locations. So there's a follow-the-sun type of strategy, and there's always someone on call and monitoring the system. We actually have some proprietary abilities to monitor the binaries themselves that are running on these servers and identify if anything looks like an anomaly or some strange aspect of a binary, and be able to isolate that binary and that server until we can figure out what's going on. From an incident standpoint, we have a standard process that's based on a NIST guideline, which is a standards body for all kinds of technology things. They have one specifically for incident response, and that includes an incident coordinator, steps to remediate the incident, and where appropriate, notification to a customer that an incident may have occurred. So if something were to happen, if there was an incident where Google Apps customer data was affected in some way, we reach out to the customer, we notify them what's going on, and work with them to identify and implement remediation for that incident. From a network security standpoint, we take a multiple layer approach. We have very, very tight control of the size and the makeup of our network perimeter. And again, we have some abilities here to really monitor the traffic and only allow authorized services and protocols to transit through the network. So we have some great abilities to spot things that look malicious potentially and stop them in moving through the network. Part of that are these intelligent detection controls that are at various data points, and our ability to automatically drop any unauthorized packets is a key part of that network security. And then finally, access to the network devices is, of course, limited to only authorized administrative personnel, and we'll talk about other aspects in terms of how we control who has access to which pieces of the infrastructure that is important in terms of being able to put your data in Google Apps and know that it's protected. So reliability, I think, is a huge benefit that we can talk about when it comes to Google Apps. So in 2010, we were actually able to achieve a 99.984% uptime for Gmail, which is even higher than our standard 99.9% SLA that we offer for Google Apps and for Gmail. And so that equates to about 7 minutes of downtime per month. And if we look at some comparison data from average implementations of on-premise email servers coming from an analysis study done in 2010, we see that reliability metric for Gmail results in about a 32 times more reliable than the average on-premise email server, and about 46 times more reliable than Microsoft Exchange, which is the leading on-premise email server. And in particular, one of the things to keep in mind around measuring uptime and reliability is this distinction between planned and unplanned downtime. One of the things that sometimes happens is when you're measuring reliability and measuring uptime, you sort of discount the planned downtime, and you sort of say, well, we've got planned maintenance windows and things like that, so that doesn't count against our measurement of availability. Well, I think it's important to keep that in mind, because it is the same type of situation where users cannot access their email or their documents. And so when you look at the combined planned and unplanned downtime, I think that's where the difference becomes even more significant. When we announced that we had this level of performance recorded for 2010, we actually updated our SLA to specifically say that Google Apps has no scheduled maintenance downtime at all, and that's directly written into the SLA in terms of how we manage these things. So that's kind of the new SLA piece that we put in there. And again, I think it's also important to consider that this type of reliability is being delivered at the same time that we're adding new features, at the same time that we're adding new users, allowing you to add new users without you having to spin up any infrastructure to support that, without you having to deploy any software to get those new features. So I think it's a great combination of reliability and the evolution of the capabilities at the same time. One of the things that we work hard to do is provide visibility and transparency into what's going on with the system. So again, in this theme of reliability, we have what's known as the App Status Dashboard, which is a place you can go. It's publicly accessible. There's no user login or password required. And you can see the status of the systems at any given time. And we just recently rolled out sort of an updated look to the status dashboard, and it includes information about any potential service issues that might be associated with each of the individual products that are part of Google Apps, and detail about what's going on with the timeline there. So, no technology is perfect. We've had a few outages here and there. We do our best to communicate as much as we can about what's going on with the situation, when it started, when it got resolved, and in between with regular updates. And I think that's, again, an area in terms of our desire to be as transparent as we can about what's going on with the services and provide that information in the most accessible fashion to our users. So the App Status Dashboard is a great way for us to get that information out there. So as an administrator, you have access to a pretty powerful set of administrative tools. We're looking at something that's called the Control Panel. This gives you control over a number of things. Some of them are at the domain-wide level and control things around users and groups and things like that. Then you have a set of service settings and policies. So within a given application such as email or Google Docs, being able to apply settings and policies for individual users or groups of users. And then if you're using any third-party tools, they're also controlled through the Google Apps Control Panel. So it's a nice central interface point and set of administrative tools that you have access to manage and run your implementation of Google Apps that you're using for your domain. One of the things that we added to the Control Panel just recently was something called the audit log. And so this is a log of administrator changes. So people that are creating new users, people that are generating new passwords. This is all tracked inside this audit log, and it's something that we added to the Control Panel fairly recently. And again, I think a good indication that in addition to new features and functions that are end-user oriented, we continue to add new features and functions that are more administrative user oriented. So, the notion that this innovation applies to both end users and to administrators, I think, is an important one. So now we're going to talk a little bit about authentication. Unless do we have any questions? I think we've got a few coming in. Maybe we can take a couple of questions.
Yeah, let's do that. We definitely have some good questions coming from the audience. So the first one is for all of those who are tuned in that are from small businesses. Basically, they're looking for something that's more easy to read and absorb, and asking if we have any type of SLA document of sort.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I think the bottom line is that SLAs and the other main document that we have that's called a term of service or TOS document, those are contractual in nature. So, to some degree, the lawyers do have to be involved in writing those. I think we've worked hard to create ours that in a way that are sort of digestible by non-legal minds. So if you go to if you search for the Google Apps Terms of Service, you'll be able to see that stuff. It's publicly accessible. And I think it's pretty straightforward. It does spell out the SLA in terms of uptime and availability that I was talking about, but that's really because it's a contract. It is what it is, and you do need to be able to look at that. We've seen lots of small and medium-sized businesses, I think, take a look at that and be successfully able to determine whether or not it meets their needs, and of course in many cases it does, and they're able to move to Google Apps.
Great, thanks, Adam. Another good one here. We have an audience member who is in law enforcement, and he's asking if there are any additional security measures or segregation for justice data.
So it's an interesting question. I think what we do have for federal, state, and local government agencies is we do have a version of Google Apps that's known as Google Apps for Government, and there is some segregation of the data there, but that is segregation of a group of agencies and government entities. There's no segregation down to an individual agency or entity level. So that being said, I think we do have a number of law enforcement agencies that are using Google Apps, and so I think you have to sort of look at how you expect to use it, and in certain cases, highly confidential or classified data that's been identified as classified is probably not data that you would want to store in Google Apps. But otherwise, we do have a lot of data that's stored there, certainly data that businesses and law enforcement agencies would consider confidential. And as we go through more of the presentation, I think you'll get a sense of some of the data protections that we have in place that can assure you that it is okay to store that data in there.
Okay. Great. Another one coming from the healthcare industry. Obviously, the healthcare industry providers have a lot of patient data and are wondering if there's a way to encrypt their emails.
So there are a couple of options in terms of email encryption. The first one is a TLS-based encryption, which essentially encrypts the channel that the email travels across, and that's a feature that's included inside Google Apps Premier Edition. And then there are, beyond that, if there's email that's going to maybe the end consumers, and you want to be able to encrypt that, all the way through to the delivery of the end user, there's an add-on product that's called Google Message Encryption that you can purchase that goes together with Google Apps and allows you to encrypt those messages beyond just the TLS encryption that's included with Google Apps.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Let's go ahead and move on with the content, and then we'll come back to more questions towards the end.
Great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about authentication. So one of the things that we have seen is that an account is something that is secured in various different ways, but in many cases it's secured with an ID and a password. And one of the things that's emerging, and many of you may already be experiencing this, is sometimes you want to do a stronger level of authentication than just an ID and a password. And there's a technology known as two-factor authentication that's been around for a while. I think it's something that's more widely used by larger enterprises because, in part, it's expensive and cumbersome and takes IT resources to deploy and support. So recently, we added a built-in two-step verification. It's a form of two-factor authentication that combines something you know, your ID and your password, with something that you have, which is your mobile phone. And when you log into Google Apps using this two-step verification, at the time that you log in, you're prompted for a second factor code that you get from your phone. So, and that code is sort of a randomly generated one-time use type of code. And what it means is that when you've set this up on your account, even if someone is able to get your ID and your password, they can't log into your account without that second code. And they can't get that second code because that is delivered to you through your mobile phone. We have apps that you can use for Android and for iPhone and for BlackBerry. And then we also can deliver the code through an SMS text message or even through a voice call. So there's a number of different ways that you can get the code. And then that code is used when you log in to provide that second factor of authentication. And this is actually something that's available right now for all Google Apps customers as well as for consumer Gmail accounts. And I would definitely encourage you to take advantage of this feature no matter what if you're using a consumer Gmail account because, again, it protects you from situations where someone may have somehow gained access to your ID and password. One of the common ways that might happen is if they hack into some other third-party site where the user has reused the same ID and password as what they're using on Gmail or other services. So using this two-step verification can really reduce the risk that anyone could get unauthorized access into your account. And again, this is something that's, I think, particularly relevant to small and medium-sized businesses who often in the past really were not in a position to deploy a two-factor authentication within their organization because of cost, because of IT resource constraints. This is just built right into Google Apps. There's no additional cost associated with it. For those of you that are using an existing authentication mechanism, we also have the ability to integrate with single sign-on technologies. We do it using the SAML protocol, so that's a standard API-level integration that you can do to take advantage of your existing authentication mechanisms. And that allows you to control things like the access method and the access point, allows you to apply your own security and policy enforcements around password management, for example, and around authentication policy. And so you could sort of say if you've got something today, you can use Google Apps and have the same level of security and control as what you have today from an authentication standpoint. The other option, of course, being to use our default, our built-in two-factor authentication if you don't have something like that in place today. So it's flexible in terms of how we allow you to integrate and take advantage of our authentication capabilities. From an identity management standpoint, we have a utility that allows you to synchronize your corporate directory using the LDAP standard and update your identity information into Google Apps. And so many customers on the small, medium, and certainly large size take advantage of this because they've invested something to create their corporate directory, either LDAP or Active Directory. And taking this utility gives you great control in terms of what information gets updated to Google Apps, how often it gets updated, lets you handle things like user change, add, move, delete, etc. And so it's a nice way to keep that data synchronized in an automated fashion up on Google Apps. So I'll talk a little bit now about policy aspects and compliance aspects of Google Apps. So for those of you that have a heavy requirement around kind of e-discovery or compliance audits, there is an add-on product for Google Apps that's known as Google Message Discovery. And this is basically an email archive that includes retention management capabilities. So it captures all the messages that are being sent to and from your organization and within your organization and puts them in an archive so that it is preserved based on your standard retention policies up to 10 years and can also do the automatic deletion of messages that have reached their expiration point at the end of your policy, but also can apply a hold on any messages that need to be retained. So for those of you that have been involved in these types of things, you know that when you are involved in a lawsuit or have a reasonable expectation of such action, you need to preserve some of those email messages, perhaps beyond the standard retention period. So this Google Message Discovery gives you the ability to do that. It also gives you some capabilities to search through the email archive, and this would be a search being done typically by an administrator or maybe by your corporate counsel for specific messages that may be relevant to a particular matter. And then once you've identified those messages, you can export those messages into a PST or MBOX format for further processing in that discovery or compliance process. There are a number of audits and reports that are available for Google Message Discovery, so you know who's accessing the archive, what are they doing in the archive, etc. And again, this is a sort of complementary add-on technology that's relevant to folks that are in situations where they have a lot of discovery needs or they have a lot of compliance needs. Here's what the interfaces for searching the archive look like. You can search for all of the standard things, dates, date ranges, keywords with different logical constructs, search both the subject, search file names, search the attachments to any of the messages that are in the archive. And then you can also do more advanced and sophisticated searching, entering your own query strings. So we use a sort of open source library that's known as Lucene that provides a syntax for entering those queries, and they can be entered into that right side dialog box for doing more advanced searches, proximity searches, things of that nature. So again, that's all part of the Google Message Discovery product, an add-on to Google Apps. Another area that comes up a lot when we talk about Google Apps and security is this area of mobile security. We've talked about a little bit that Google Apps is a tremendously valuable tool because it can be used on these different mobile devices. But how do we as an organization sort of manage and allow our users to safely and successfully use these different devices? Well, we have a capability known as mobile device management that's built right into Google Apps. It's part of the control panel. And it gives you some pretty good degree of control over what folks can do or need to do with their mobile devices. So, for example, doing certain password management things like requiring them to have a password on the phone, setting some links and other requirements for the passwords on those phones, wiping the device after a certain number of failed password attempts, remote wiping the device if it's lost or stolen. All of these are examples of mobile device management policies that you can apply, and we apply it across different types of mobile devices. So not everything is available on every type of device. You kind of need to look explicitly at what device type you're supporting, whether it's an iPhone, whether it's a BlackBerry, whether it's an Android device, and then there are specific sets of these policies that are available. But again, it's an area where we've been evolving. We rolled out some new stuff over the summer this past year to enhance this capability. And I think, again, it's all in the notion of how do we enable our users to safely and successfully use these mobile devices to access their corporate data and be able to do that in a way that we authorize and we approve and we feel protects our data in an effective way. So now let's talk a little bit about sort of matters of trust, if you will. We do a lot to protect your privacy internally. So our software development process itself has specific checkpoints and focus areas around privacy. Of course, we do it for security as well, but we've also spent a lot of time looking at privacy and understanding how we're going to handle data that is customer data that's confidential and private. And that's built right into our software development process, from design to coding and testing, and finally to deployment and production. There's a very tight control over who has access to the systems and might potentially have access to customer data. It's a least privilege access list. It has VP oversight, and it's managed on a regular basis to ensure that it is current and only the appropriate people have access to it. And folks that do have access to systems where there's customer data go through a set of background checks before they're hired to work here at Google. Our culture is very focused on security and privacy, and you can kind of get a glimpse of that if you look at our code of conduct that's available out on our corporate website. It's something that we think about in everything that we do. It's something that kind of pervades our DNA, if you will, because of our existence on the Internet and our development of applications that, from the very beginning, were built as Internet service-oriented, now known as cloud applications. So that stuff is both built into our processes and built into our culture. One thing that I think is important, and again, this is back to the question of simple language in these documents. If you look at our terms of service and our contracts, you'll see that we're very clear that you own your data. We do not own your data. There's a specific descriptor for that. You are the data controller. That's a term that's used more prevalently over in Europe, for example. That makes us the data processor. And you can delete or remove your data at any time. And in our privacy policy, you can see information on exactly how that works when you want to delete the data from our system. So the privacy policy is another document that, although written by lawyers, I think we've done a lot of work to make it understandable for non-lawyers. And I think it does stand in contrast to some of the other click-through type agreements that many of you probably encounter from time to time as you're interacting with other services. So I encourage you to take a look at that, google.com/privacy, and you can see that, for example, we don't share your information with third parties. For Google Apps Premier and education and government users, when you turn off the advertising, we're not scanning anything for advertising purposes. So you have some, I think, good information and assurances there in the privacy policy about how we handle those things. So we also protect your privacy externally in a number of different ways. I talked about the privacy policy. We also are very active in terms of defending our users' privacy from various things. One of them is government requests. So because we have data in our systems, and it's data from consumers, it's data from businesses, we do get requests from governments for information about that. We actually have created a transparency report which shows how many of those types of requests we get and what countries they're coming from, etc. Now, I think this is interesting because it's our ability to be as transparent as we can about these types of things. And if you look at some of the other cloud providers that are out there, you're not seeing this level of disclosure. They're getting the same types of requests that we are, especially the big ones, but they're not providing this level of visibility, transparency into what's going on in this area. So I encourage you to take a look at that. The other thing to point out about those is, the vast majority of those requests are for consumer Gmail accounts that are involved in some sort of criminal investigation. So there's really very little to be concerned about as a business organization that's not, conducting any nefarious activities to be concerned about government requests for data. And then finally, we are US EU Safe Harbor certified. So if you've got parts of your organization that are located over in Europe, there's a standard mechanism that allows for the data transfer to occur between Europe and the U.S. In a way that it is effectively protected and the privacy is covered. And you can see information on that Safe Harbor certification on the export.gov/Safe Harbor website that's listed there. So we also have a really good history of advocating for privacy. And a history of challenging the government when they do come and ask for information. And there's a couple of short links there for a case where, this was a couple years ago, where the government was asking for search history across a very wide range of users, and we were successful in pushing back on that. Now, a lot of these situations where there is a request from a government, our standard process is to review that and to make sure that it is appropriate, and where necessary, push back on that request and sort of contest it to whichever court or agency is requesting that information. So those two links there provide some cases that have been publicly disclosed. I talked about the transparency report. The other thing that we're doing is working to reform the Electronic Communications Protection Act, or the ECPA. This is a piece of legislation that has been outpaced by technology, basically, and we are working together with a number of other industry members as well as trade associations to really effect a reform on that I think will be beneficial for both consumer end users and for businesses. So in terms of aspects of trusting Google, we talked a little bit about sort of the control panel and the administrative tools that you get. The other thing to point out is what's known as the profile dashboard, if you will. So it's different from the app status dashboard that we talked about before. This is a dashboard that sort of shows you what information does Google know and associate with a particular profile. And so again, you can look at this for your consumer Gmail ID if you have one now. And you can also control the information that's in there and restrict what is visible to others, etc. Now, from a confidence standpoint, there's a couple of key third-party certifications that are worth mentioning. They are SSAE 16 and its international counterpart ISAE 3402. These are updates to what used to be known as the SAS 70 audit. And what it basically means is that a third-party auditor comes in and certifies the data protections and security controls that we have in place within our systems. And so this is something that has become a little bit of a standard in the cloud application provider space, and it gives you, again, some assurances that a third party has come in and verified that these data protections are, in fact, in place. And then again, on the Google Apps for Government edition, for those of you that are in state or local government or federal government agencies, we also have a FISMA certification. So that's something that's required in order for those agencies to use our products and to use Google Apps. And again, in particular, that's a very rigorous third-party evaluation of security and data protection controls that I think is useful, both in the Google Apps for Government space, but also I think somewhat applicable in the private sector space as a third-party attestation about what we do there. And then finally, on the choice standpoint, it's very important that that our users are using our system because they love our applications and they get great value out of it. But if for any reason they don't want to use our applications anymore, we've worked hard to enable them to take the data out of our systems. And that's what this thing on the right that has a D and an L with a fist in it, that is the symbol for the Data Liberation Front, which is an organization within Google. It's an engineering team that's dedicated to allowing people to get their information out of Google Apps very, very effectively. And so not just Google Apps, but all of the Google applications, both consumer and business, are documented in terms of getting data out on the Data Liberation Front. And you can go to their website at dataliberation.org. So we're not about locking users into our applications. We're about them using them because they get value out of them and they enjoy them, and they're good applications to use. But if there's any reason that you do want to take your data, we provide documentation and utilities, et cetera, to help you do that. And again, I think when you look at cloud vendors and other types of cloud applications, you really want to evaluate that. What is the potential exit strategy if you need to get your data out of the application? So security is really a big part of our DNA. We have an information security team that is comprised of over 250 people that are monitoring the systems 24/7. That team is comprised of some of the world's foremost experts. They come from corporate world, they come from academia, and I think especially if you're a small or medium-sized business, it's really hard to identify and maintain a dedicated team of security expertise, but if you're running your own on-premise servers, you don't have a choice. You have to do something along those lines. If you move to Google Apps, you get to take advantage of our expertise in security, and obviously that's working to protect the data that's inside Google Apps. From a process standpoint, we talked about the ability to have the data centralized to be accessed by users across an internet connection and not having to have data leakage due to a proliferation of data on devices that could potentially be lost. We talked about the patching pieces that we do that eliminate the burden on you from having to do that, at least for this set of applications. And we talked a little bit about the audits for the SSAE 16 and the ISAE 3402, so that third-party verification of our processes that helps ensure that the data is effectively secured and protected. And then we talked about our technology stack, both from an operations standpoint as well as from a infrastructure and server standpoint earlier in the presentation. And again, this is the same security that protects Google.com. Our own corporate data is within these data centers, within these servers, within these applications. And you can get that same level of protection for your data as well when you move to Google Apps. So just kind of in summary here before we move into Q&A, we're able to bring huge economies of scale to security. So there's benefits obviously on the messaging and collaboration side in terms of cost, but there's also great benefits in terms of security from the scale at which we operate these things. We've built our data centers to physically and logically protect the data that's stored in there. There are great control mechanisms both on our side to protect your privacy internally, but also on your side to help protect and secure the data that you put in Google Apps. I think there's some real authentication advantages in terms of the built-in two-step verification, especially for small and medium-sized businesses. And also from a security standpoint, we talked about having the information security expertise working to protect your data that we're able to bring to bear. Remote access is encrypted, so this really relates to your sessions as a user. When you access Google Apps, it's going through an encrypted HTTPS type of connection. So as the data moves back and forth between your browser and our servers, that data is encrypted. Endpoint data minimized, we talked about that because of our ability to share the documents and get access to email without having to have copies of it on the end devices. And we have a policy management framework that we talked about and how we control that through the control panel tool. And then finally, I mean, customer trust means everything to us. It's so easy to do things that lose trust. And for example, if you have a lot of issues with services and outages, and you're not transparent and sharing of information about what's going on there, it's very easy to lose the trust of the customer base. But we're working extremely hard to earn that trust and to keep that trust. And doing events like this and presenting some of this information and publishing our security white paper and building the Trust website are all examples of how we're trying to provide that visibility and transparency to our users. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for spending the time with us, and we'll move into Q&A, although I do want to point out just a link there on the bottom. If you do have more information, you can go to google.com/apps, and there's a link to contact sales there. So if you click on that link, you can get in touch with folks that can answer additional questions for you. And also google.com/apps/trust is a resource for more information on these security and reliability areas as well. And with that, Anya, I'll open it up and see if we have some other questions that have come in.
We do. We have a very engaged audience today, so thank you, Adam. The one that has appeared quite often so far is about how the U.S. government asks for information from Google. Can you describe how Google handles these types of situations?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just the U.S. government; it's potentially foreign governments as well. We do have a standard process for responding to these types of things, and what it involves in is the very first response that we take is to say we don't own the data, so if you're looking for data from an organization or an individual, you need to go to that organization or individual and present the request to them. So that's sort of the first part of the process. The second part, if the agency is further authorized to present this request to Google, our standard policy is to notify any customer where we are legally permitted to do so that this request has come in, and then the customer has the chance to contest that request. And so that's another part of our process there. We also have a team of specially trained people, including lawyers, that review these requests and kind of contest them or push back when we feel they are too broad or too vague. And we have, I think, again, there's a couple of examples I talked about earlier, a good history of pushing back on those things. So again, for some small and medium-sized businesses, perhaps that's a little bit of a benefit because they may not have the resources to be able to analyze those things and look at them in the same level of detail and scrutiny that we're able to do. As we go through these processes, again, if the customer is able to successfully contest the request for that information, we won't provide that information to the government agency that's looking for it. Ultimately, as these processes move their way through the flow, we are a U.S. corporation. We are subject to the law, so there are certain cases where we are providing information that is asked for by government agencies. So again, at a high level, that's the standard approach, and that's how we handle those requests. Yeah, that's a really good question because I think there's some huge benefits there. So first of all, when you use Google Apps as an organization, I think there's a big chunk of your IT infrastructure that you no longer have to do a lot of disaster recovery planning for because we're handling it for you. So we have a number of case studies and testimonials that talk about folks that have been through a natural disaster or a fire in their data center, but were still able to have their users be productive because they were using Google Apps and they weren't, affected because of issues with their own infrastructure. We build our data centers and our applications in a very resilient and redundant way. So all your data is always replicated and synchronized basically in real time between multiple data centers that are geographically separated. So if something happens to one data center, again, your users can still access their information pretty much seamlessly and transparently without any notice that something may be going on in one part of the country to one set of data centers. So I think there's a huge benefit as a customer in terms of reducing your own need to plan for and deploy architecture and infrastructure for disaster recovery purposes, And then there's sort of the side of how we do it that allows you to avoid that on your own part. So, small and medium-sized businesses, in a lot of cases, it's challenging to have all that additional infrastructure. And with Google Apps, you just don't need it. We take care of it for you.
Great. Thank you again. Awesome content. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. As I mentioned, I will be sending all of this out to you just in a few days. And stay tuned for more webinar invites from us. We're going to be doing 2 more security-focused webinars in the next 2 months, so look out for those invitations. And thank you so much again, Adam.
Thank you, Anya.